for MCP developers, we provide a platform for them to connect their GitHub repository, perform CI/CD, deploy, and finally list and kind of maintain the hosting for their MCP servers.
Welcome to InProd, conversations with founders and operators who are building the next wave of AI companies. We go deep on product execution, go-to-market, and the messy middle of building a business. If you're an aspiring founder, operator, or just startup curious, this is your inside look at how companies actually get built.
Before we get to the episode, Laura and I are excited to announce a partnership with Overlap. Fresh out of Y Combinator's summer batch, Overlap is an AI-driven app that uses large language models to curate the best moments from podcast episodes. Imagine having a smart assistant who reads through every podcast transcript, finds the best parts or parts most relevant to your search, and strings them together to form a new, curated stream of content. That is what Overlap does. I personally use Overlap to explore content on future podcast guests and highly recommend it as another diligence tool for investors. Check out Overlap on the App Store today.
Today, we're joined by Ani and Henry, co-founders at Smithery. Smithery is a marketplace and runtime for MCP servers that makes it easier for developers to distribute, discover, and monetize tools in this emerging agent ecosystem. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
This will be fun. A joint episode today. So, Ani, you've worked at places like Browserbase and whatnot before founding Smithery. Maybe let's just touch on what drew you into the AI space initially.
Absolutely. I think with Browserbase and whatnot, Browserbase is dev tools focused and whatnot was a marketplace. And so specifically like on the ML team, just really focused on like feed ranking and personalization at the marketplace level. And then with Smithery, it's effectively a dev tools marketplace. So I think there was just like a really nice like stars aligning there, given this like pivotal time and like how foundation models are asymptotically converging to the same levels of intelligence. Really, it becomes a battle of context at this point, right? So how can we basically find the right context to give to a model in like an intelligent, marketplace way, such that, people can just find whatever they want and plug it into their model and have it work.
What was the turning point that you wanted to branch off and build something yourself?
I've always wanted to, like since high school.
Were you the high schooler that learned how to code far ahead of high school and was tinkering on side projects?
Absolutely. I was my first programming class, we learned Visual Studio, and so I was like doing Visual Basic and C# and all the things that I wouldn't touch with a 9-foot pole now. But yeah, it was super fun to just build things and see it come to life. And also, I grew up in North Carolina, so not that much of like tech around me, but I was just chronically online and I saw these other people that were my age doing really cool things like the Teal Ship or, YC and stuff like that. It really just inspired me to just, follow their journey as well.
Were there any folks that you looked up to?
It's crazy. I would tell you, but like now they're like my peers. And so it's wild because, I grew up seeing a lot of people just online, and then I come here and the amount of times I used to go by Andy back then too. Now I go by Anira, and like they see me on Twitter or something. They're like, oh, are you Andy from Facebook? And I'm like, God, this is great because it's from 2015. Yeah, it's pretty nuts. A lot of really, really cool people.
Full circle with new identity.
Absolutely.
And then Henry, you co-founded a previous AI company focused on helping AI researchers. What do you think about your experience from that company led you to this new wave of AI infrastructure that you're enabling at Smithery?
Yeah, so at Jenny, we were building a academic copilot for researchers. It's very much a consumer/prosumer app. And I spent a lot of time with these researchers kind of watching how they use AI tools, how they conduct research, and how they, create AI workflows for themselves. One thing that really stuck with me through my journey at Jenny was that I saw a lot of researchers would have ChatGPT open or Jenny open, and they would have 7, 10 different PDFs open at the same time with Zotero, with Google Scholar, different apps. And they were copy and pasting between these apps and ChatGPT all the time, back and forth. So it felt like a really frustrating user experience. And it seemed like, there was something missing there. Like these models were getting smarter. We started Jenny because GPT-2 came out back in maybe 2018, 2019. And then we were like, wow, this is such a cool model. Let's take writing to the next level. But, models have continually improved over the years. I think the shift in bottleneck has transitioned from model intelligence to context and capabilities. And that's kind of how my time at Jenny kind of inspired me to look into MCPs and found Smithery.
Is Jenny still running today?
Yeah.
What was the transition like, stepping down or handing over the reins?
It was definitely challenging because for any sort of transition, you need to make sure the team is operating. They probably don't know everything about what's happening, and you had to find somebody to replace your role and so on. Yeah, but I would say it was quite a tough, maybe 6 months. Yeah.
And so then the two of you came together. Maybe let's just touch on how you two met and what it was like teaming up, and then what the roles and responsibilities look like.
I started Smithery as a side project, actually, around November, about 2 weeks after MCP was launched. During that time, I was open exploration. I was playing around with AI agents. I was trying to tackle the Arc AGI challenge as well. And then MCPs came out, and I was like, oh, let me just make Smithery a website to showcase some of these developer open source MCPs that developers were making. So it kind of started off as just a list. You can think of it like Product Hunt, but for MCPs. I saw Browserbase create their MCP, and then I created a pull request to their repository saying, hey, you can make your MCP more deployable. Why don't you kind of list it on Smithery? And Ani's sort of the main point of contact there, and that's kind of how we met.
Yeah, it was funny actually. We kind of gave Henry a hard time because we were like, I don't want you like shilling your product on our repo. But we knew Henry, like, we knew Jenny and everything. And so we accepted the PR. And then, yeah, it was just like over time, Smithery was the only registry that didn't just list servers. You could run servers through Smithery, which is really powerful because it provided really deep, and not even deep at the time, but just analytics. Who was actually using your server? Like, how much traction was your server getting? And it was just the only metric outside of GitHub stars that had any indication of, hey, your thing is actually getting tool calls. So at Browserbase, like, we actually had no other, like, we were trying to figure out, like, hey, how much should we invest into our MCP? Like, we're getting a lot of, like, Twitter hype around it, but who's actually using it versus just who's just looking at it on GitHub? And so we saw, like, okay, Browserbase getting 15,000 monthly tool calls, and, like, others that are bigger are getting, like, hundreds of thousands of tool calls. So not only are we getting significant usage, but also there's so much more room to grow. And I think, like, having built for AI, there's just like this wave of all these other people that were building specifically for AI. And if we could help them kind of, tell them what they could do to make their thing more AI friendly, I think that was just a huge value prop for me.
So what is the benefit on both sides of the marketplace? Like, why? I mean, a lot of folks are developing MCP servers. Like, at what point would you turn to Smithery?
So I can talk a little bit about the supply side first.
Okay.
So on the supply side, we have people who are trying to build and deploy their MCP servers. They want to get distribution. They want to find a way to showcase what it means to create an AI native service. One good example of this is Exa, which is one of our favorite MCPs, or most popular MCPs on Smithery. They provide a core functionality to AI agents, which is the ability to do semantic search, through a large corpus of high quality data that's crawled from the web. And, a lot of these services have been conceived with the idea that their primary user is going to be AI agents, which is a very new concept that I think as a community, we're still trying to grasp. So Smithery kind of serves as a place for them to showcase and say, hey, this is made for agents. And this is how agents are using it. Look at how many tool calls we have. And we generate a storefront for them. We kind of showcase their tools, and we allow people to easily install it. So that kind of bridges to the demand side, like who's kind of looking for MCPs nowadays. I think we're still at a very early phase of MCP. We're seeing like power users of Claude Desktop as sort of the primary audience, people who want to kind of juice out their Claude Desktop by maybe another 10%. They want to add on a more advanced search, Exa, for example, or they want some other capabilities like being able to execute terminal commands from Claude. So a lot of very power user focused use cases.
And how much is run through like Smithery today versus just folks running the MCP themselves?
It's interesting. I think like the number of people that are like Smithery is probably the easiest way to discover MCPs. So especially for like long tail, like random ones, there's like academic research MCPs that are really nice for, finding papers relevant to what you're looking for. PubMed has an MCP server on Smithery. Both of these get like 2,000 to 3,000 tool calls a day. And even more interestingly, there's like a Pokemon MCP server that is just like, researching Pokemon specifically. It has tools like get Pokemon, get random Pokemon, etc. And this also gets like 2,000 tool calls a day, which is pretty insane. And so to your point, like on running it themselves, the biggest problem with running it yourself is how hard it is. Not hard, but like if I'm an MCP developer and I want you to use my MCP, I have to account for, are you using it in cursor, cloud code, root, tray, amp, augment code, and like literally for Browserbase, there were thousands of MCP clients. Like we were looking at the analytics ourselves, and like I think there's obviously a long tail servers like the one I mentioned, but there's also a really long tail of clients. And so managing installation instructions for all of these different clients is such a huge pain. And so like basically people come to us to find servers and just like one click install without having to run it themselves. So as far as the counterfactual of like how many people are running it themselves without Smithery, probably a good amount. Obviously we wouldn't know.
So how do you manage and maintain each server from a technical standpoint?
For MCP developers, we provide a platform for them to connect their GitHub repository, perform CI/CD, deploy, and final list, and kind of maintain the hosting for their MCP servers. So in a technical capacity, we're doing a lot of infrastructure work right now. One of the things we've been working on the last couple of weeks is like Smithery identity, which is a way to authenticate to a lot of these services with significantly lower friction. One of the key themes of Smithery is like we want to reduce friction. We want to make it so it's easy for supply side to supply what they want to the demand side, right? And historically as in just like 6 months ago, it's been mostly, a cumbersome process to use MCP servers. You have to go through a 5-step process of copying a JSON file into your cloud desktop or cursor, and you had to copy API keys manually. And we're trying to remove all that friction. We want to make, MCP as easy to install as something on App Store.
Yeah, definitely. I see it as like Airbnb. It's like you're going to go to Airbnb because you want to see options and you want to pick the best rental for your desired stay. But you could go directly to the landlord. You could go to other sites, but people go to Airbnb because it's easy and they manage everything for you.
Absolutely. And I think with Airbnb too, you also get the reviews of like how many people have stayed in this Airbnb and like what do they think about it, versus if you went direct to the landlord, you're just biased by what they're going to tell you. And yeah, I think the identity piece is like super interesting. I do want to double click on that a little bit because like there's all these like AI native services at the end of the day are basically just APIs, but for like things that would be useful for an AI to have an API access to, right? Like Browserbase basically just like reconstructed the AI primitives for a browser that already existed. Exa is like AI search, etc. And so like a lot of like AI native like service companies don't really need UIs apart from just like dashboards of usage basically. And this is not like, obviously Exa and Browserbase have like they're well-established companies, but like the brand new companies that are emerging right now are basically just APIs. And so there's like, with that, it's like, you don't want to have a UI just to sign people up and sign people in. I think what's really exciting about Smithery identity is, people are on Smithery and they're like, oh, I need email for my agent. Can I just dynamically find something that provides this and, link it to my client and automatically basically sign me up for this without me having to think about it at all? So it's like machine to machine signing up for user with with very little UI because you're on Smithery already.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. What exactly does Auth look like today, and how would folks interact with it on Smithery? And I guess let's just set the stage. This is what, a 9-month-old company?
Yeah, 9 months.
Yeah, okay. So it's very early.
Yeah, so just for a little bit of context and bridging what I mentioned just now, MCP has historically started off as like a standard IO protocol, required people to copy JSON files, and then you kind of had to add API keys yourself by copying and pasting into that JSON file in order to kind of run the server with an API key. Now, Streamable HTTP came out around March of this year, along with the OAuth specification for MCP. And this is a huge upgrade because, with this specification, people developing MCP servers can now rely on OAuth, which is a much more established and user-friendly way to handle authentication compared to having people copy API keys. So what Smithery is providing is somewhat of a bridge for those companies right now who are still on API keys to be OAuth native. So we generate an OAuth screen for them. We allow them to specify what keys they need or kind of what configurations they have. And we kind of store all these keys on Smithery to provide a convenience to users and also for developers.
I think the simplest way of explaining this is like right now, if I want to use Smithery with Supabase, for example, I have to leave Smithery, go to Supabase, find my API key, copy it, put it into Smithery, and then use it again. Versus what if there was just like button add Supabase, a little login screen pops up if needed, and then it just, adds it to your thing. I think even cooler than that is you click add Supabase, and if you don't have an account, there's no screen at all. It's like, oh, you're already on Smithery. We can just attach Supabase to your account. You don't even need to
Or
go.
Neon.
Or
Yeah,
Neon.
Neon.
or any other database company. Supabase is
No,
one
I'm
of
just kidding.
Now, a quick word from our sponsor. Laura and I are thrilled to announce a partnership with Grata, an intuitive deal sourcing and diligence platform. Keep missing out on private market deals? Ditch the Rolodex and get Grata. Grata's AI-powered platform provides accurate data, deep insights, and time-saving workflows that help get more deals done. And it's trusted by over 500 firms and 3,000 deal makers, including myself. I've personally used Grata in both my deal sourcing and diligence workflows and would recommend their tool to any investor across private equity, growth equity, corp dev, or investment banking. We've negotiated a special offer for our audience. Mention PartnerPath to the Grata team during sign-up, and you'll get free executive seats for your partners and MDs included in your subscription. Now, back to the episode.
How does that enhance the general workflow? Like once you add in Supabase, I'm trying to frame this from a partner's perspective because there are so many different layers of infrastructure that can interact with like MCPs. And I feel like depending on who you choose to partner with or what you choose to integrate will just enhance the experience and therefore drive more people to the platform. See what I'm getting at?
You mean, what would it take for a developer to adopt this?
No, I mean, more so like you mentioned the Supabase example, but what are the other ways that you're enhancing the platform through partnerships or the security of it and the auth?
Yeah, I think we're very focused on like security and auth right now, but also just like building trust in this whole thing. Like right now, MCP just has a reputation of being kind of jank and also just not working. And I mean, Twitter will give you a field day if you like want to look at MCP hot takes, but I think we want to be kind of a brand that makes it feel like it actually works and it actually helps you accomplish a task and, get from point A to point B.
What are the most common tasks you're seeing run through today? I know that we mentioned a few at the beginning with Exa and Browserbase, but what are common themes?
Yeah, a lot of the most popular MCPs today are there to provide context. I think we're at a state where agents are still kind of risky to run autonomously. Like you don't want it to send emails on your behalf without approval, right? So the most popular MCPs today have been like Context 7, for example, which is like specifically providing context about documentation to help developers like vibe code faster. So context has been sort of one big category. Context and search, you can think of them as kind of similar category. But obviously there is this emerging category actually taking some action. And, we're I think in the next couple of years, we'll be seeing more and more of that as, agents mature.
I think Ani brought up a good point. It's like some perceive MCPs as being janky, and so some may write them off and maybe just use an API or depending on the use case. Do you also have to filter in adoption and general marketing to your go-to-market so it does become a universal standard? And so people aren't writing it off. Developers are picky. Developers don't want to pay for things. And so if they're writing off MCPs,
I think we are. I think that what's happening is potentially premature abstraction, which is not really always good. In that people choose to like have their own tools. Really, the premise of MCP that's the problem is kind of the implementations of MCP. The biggest thing that we're seeing is like a lot of MCP servers have been built as just like, let's throw it out there and see what happens. And so when you do something like that, you're not really putting your full effort into it. And so there's like a huge supply of like medium quality servers out there that are neither here nor there. They don't provide enough value for me to want to use it, but it's still like, it's just out there. And so clients are basically like, I don't need to use this MCP server. It doesn't really do my job. But because I have access to the API, I can just write my own that works well enough. And so most people are just taking what exists out there and just building their own tools without having to go through the overhead of writing like a general purpose MCP server. If there's an application out there that's like incredibly complicated and it's easier for me to just write the code to do it myself instead of using this other application that I have to go sign up for and like fit to my needs, people could just write the code to do that. But the problem is like, if everybody does that, there's probably a pattern in there somewhere. So realistically, what I'm thinking is going to happen is a lot of people are going to build stuff for themselves. Maybe they don't use MCP or like, maybe, a lot of people just do a lot of like bespoke implementations. But from all these bespoke implementations, I mean, so much of software is distributed. You want to be able to share your things to other agents. And so the promise of like this, internet of AI services is definitely out there. And I think it just, I don't know, maybe needs some paradigm adjustment. But
yeah.
I think the interesting thing to, note about MCP is that it's kind of a statement on the separation of concern.
Yeah.
It's like saying that, people who are creating services are responsible for their prompts and how agents should interact with them. Instead of, before MCPs, people would build tools directly into the agents. And that made a lot of sense. That still makes a lot of sense if you're building a very verticalized agent where you're only going to need 2 different services. That's it. You will never expand it, right? But I think MCP shines when agents get more and more general, when people want more and more things added onto their agent. It's a more scalable approach, but it only scales if the intelligence also scales and kind of demand for more connections also scales. So I think in summary, it's a pretty interesting statement on like, who's responsible for what. Like agent developers and clients are responsible for sort of the user experience, the intelligent aspect of building an agent, but the tool makers are responsible for making their tools high quality, but also like creating a prompt so agents can use it well, like having a good agent experience.
Really kind of putting it all together, I think the biggest thing is like tool calling is very important for agents. The biggest thing is like a lot of the clients just build their own tools because they don't want to rely on MCP just yet. In the way that like you don't need Context 7 because Cursor has their own documentation indexing engine. And so you don't need Exa in Cursor because they have their own web search. Like ChatGPT and Claude have their own implementations of web search. So some of these like you don't need, but for example, like PubMed and like these academic research ones are actually really useful because sometimes you might need to pull in research in like Claude Desktop in order to do more things. And so is Claude Desktop going to build every single thing that you might need in-house and kind of white label it such that, you're never going to need to think about it? Or like likely what's going to happen is you have like iOS where you have like some opinionated defaults for like web search and, these other things that might be pertinent to your client. But you're also going to need an app store at some point to say like, okay, this isn't cutting it anymore. Like we need to open the floodgates here.
So it's like, if you think about apps benefiting from LLMs getting better, it sounds like Smithery benefits from more agents in production.
More agents in production that need to connect to other things as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So do you think that there'll be competing protocols that emerge?
Right now, the momentum for MCP is high enough that my personal bet is on MCP. But I think the protocol is like less interesting than the concept of AI native service, right? I think the protocol kind of is sort of a distillation of what people have been thinking. Like I would honestly say like Exa is probably one of the pioneers in this space, whereas like they were building search for AI before people had this idea of like building something for AI, not for humans to use, right? And so MCP is kind of a codification of this concept of like, we're going to build a business for AI. So I think that concept is way more important than the specific details of the protocol. The protocol is evolving. Like there are working groups, there's a committee, involves multiple companies, and it is developing. It is kind of fixing some of the bugs that exist. I personally would bet on MCP, but I think at the same time, the more important thing is the bigger picture statement of AI native service is going to be the thing of the future.
Absolutely. To add on to that, like even Browserbase is like super prescient here. Not only building the browser for AI, but specifically knowing in like 2023, 2020, like early 2024, that like someone else is going to build the agent, some agent, but that agent might need to control a browser, but it shouldn't have to be responsible for writing browser automation code, which is the whole premise of Stagehand. It was an SDK for humans and tools for agents. And it was this tools as a service thing that was really first of its kind to the extent that I can remember.
If you fast forward, how does this change the way that we interact like with software? What is it going to look like? Paint the current state and then the future state.
Yeah, I think the current state of things is like AI is being used as just another app. So what I mean by this is you need AI to do something for you. You would open up, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Manus, Claude Desktop, one of these apps. You do something there, and then you kind of close the app. You're done, right? I think where we're heading is a much more integrated experience of AI, one in which AI serves as somewhat the glue between different apps and sort of the interface between the interfaces. It might sound a bit abstract because I don't know what that product exactly looks like, but having a much more integrated experience where AI just knows everything or close to everything that you want it to know and has context of all the apps out there, that seems to me like a much more appealing vision of what a human AI experience would be, rather than having to copy and paste all the time.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What is, in terms of Smithery being a marketplace, how do you establish rules or what can be put on the marketplace? You have over, 6,000 or 7,000 servers today? And are there ways to identify what does not qualify in terms of the quality, or I'm sure there's fraud and other potentially illegal things that could happen. And so you probably have to put guardrails in place.
We're currently doing a very basic security scan on servers that are deployed. But otherwise, we have taken a very open approach, kind of like GitHub, where people can publish servers. It'll be under their name. And we also link to their GitHub repository if it's open source and the commit that they deployed from. So there are some ways for you to check manually if you need that extra level of trust beyond kind of our initial security scan. But I think the most important trust factor is kind of community vetting. So kind of like how when you go on Google Maps, you look at a restaurant, you would trust the reviews, and a number of reviews are made. At Smithery, we're kind of giving you a metric of how many tool calls have agents made on this service. And the services that get more tool calls tend to be more trustworthy.
Are there North Star metrics that you all are setting for yourself over the next year? This is what we want to track. This is what we want to get to. Or how do you define success?
I think we can define success broadly as like we want to increase the GDP of the AI economy, AI agent economy. That's a very broad way of saying it.
How do you track that? I'm just kidding.
But a metric that we're tracking right now is like the number of tool calls that are being made through the platform, through our platform. And we definitely want to increase that. Down the line, we want to increase by GDP. Like down the line, we want to increase the amount of revenue that we're helping all these vendors get.
Yeah, it's like if people could just access AI services and everything very easily. I mean, there's a lot of AI services out there that are charging money and, are future unicorns. If they could expand access and the other potential companies that are to follow in their footsteps, they could start making money as well through Smithery, because we just make it that much more easier for them to attract users and get usage.
What's been the most surprising thing that you've learned from a developer or feedback on the platform so far?
I was at this MCP event and the co-founder of Mux was speaking there, which is interesting because it's like a video company. I didn't expect giving a talk on MCP. But the most prescient thing he said was that MCP is like a huge hammer and everything looks like a shiny nail. And so what we're seeing in the community a lot now is there's a lot more builders than we expected. And the users have yet to catch up to the amount of builders. I think every engineer is oh, I should build an MCP server, which is amazing and great for the community. But you end up with a lot of just there's a lot of slop out there with MCP. And to your point, quality is really important. This is why we show tool usage to say this actually gets usage. I think that the surprising thing is just this kind of bifurcation of people who use MCP and the people who build MCP. And there's just so many people who build MCPs that never talk to potential users and just build it for fun. And so you end up with 50 different versions of a Gmail MCP server, which is not, again, it's just a marketplace problem, right? Even before ChatGPT had an app, there were 50 different ChatGPT knockoffs on the App Store. And people can usually tell okay, do I trust Henry/Gmail, or do I just use the Gmail one when it officially? So I think it's a bit of a waiting game. Yeah, that's probably the most surprising part. It's just the amount of people that are just really want to build MCP servers for people that don't exist.
What's an MCP server that doesn't exist today that you're looking for?
I think we were talking about this just this last couple of days. If there's an MCP server I think if they're more compositional MCP servers, that'll be interesting. What I mean by that is MCP server could be a traditional integration, but it could also be an agent or sub-agent in itself, right? One of the example kind of tasks that we struggled with maybe a month ago was domain name negotiation. So it's we want to buy a domain's $100,000. We want to negotiate for a better price.
What were you trying to buy AGI.com?
We're not going to say.
Yeah, can't drive up the price.
Yeah, let's say it's $100,000. You want to negotiate down to $50,000. Do you go out and hire a domain broker to do it for you, who would charge you maybe 10% or something like that?
I didn't know those existed, to be completely transparent.
They exist.
Oh yeah.
I've usually just gone directly.
Yeah. So a great MCP server will be one that kind of searches for domains. But another interesting MCP server for this will be one that actually implements a sub-agent, which is a broker, and can go and orchestrate emailing, domain name search, and then try to negotiate on my behalf.
A simpler one that I forgot that I actually was using the other day is also just brand kind of checkers, in that it's an MCP server that can tell you if a domain name is available, or if a package on NPM is available, which is really simple. It's just an API call, yes. But if I'm using ChatGPT to come up with brand names for something, ChatGPT doesn't know what brand names are actually available. So then I could also just say okay, just tell me which one of these I could actually go buy a domain for. And then it'll tell you this one's going to charge $100,000 or something, right? Or this one's just not available. Mm-hmm. So it's really nice for that as well, even before we get to negotiation on the price.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of use cases, but that'll be for the next episode.
I think the space is just so nascent, right? Like it's still so rapidly evolving. I think we're seeing a lot of interest from really big players in the space.
What do you mean by really big players?
Like Okta, WorkOS, Google, like they're all investing heavily into like the agentic internet as a whole, but also MCP specifically.
So how would you work with the larger players? What does it look like from a complementary standpoint?
I think for now, it's kind of like we're collaborating on the spec with a lot of these players because these, we want to have like a standardization there. So whatever we do avoids duplicate work on their end, vice versa. So far it's kind of been like this. But, bigger players adopting MCP and MCP ecosystem in general, like OpenAI, ChatGPT just launched full MCP support, I think a week ago.
And
So-
we're like kind of back and forth on that one.
Yeah. so like we're seeing like increased adoption from these bigger clients and bigger players, which is like really good for the community.
Yeah. We talked to Aaron from Okta yesterday, and it was just so illuminating because he's just like, his whole job is writing protocols. And he was just like rattling off like RFC numbers and everything. And like he drew this beautiful diagram on the board that I tweeted out yesterday. But there's so many complexities around like Okta, for example, as an identity manager, because I won't get into that actually, but
It's too technical.
Yeah, it's very technical. But it's just, the thing is like when things are this complicated, but this much value adding, if done correctly, it just makes it that much more fulfilling to go chase this like big problem.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, yeah, we don't have the solutions right now, but if we did,
It wouldn't be fun.
yeah, if it was that easy, it wouldn't be fun. Yeah. So,
That's why Smithery exists.
hell yeah,
Awesome. Well, do you guys want to end with a quick fire round?
of course.
We'll do it like Ani, Henry. Okay, Ani, what is your favorite MCP today?
Whew. I think like all the really small ones, Linear and Notion are great for brainstorming and like helping me kind of just, do my tasks or, I'm planning a trip next week. I can't say where because it's a surprise. And it was really nice to just like, have ChatGPT kind of like brainstorm with me on itinerary. And I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, go dump this in my Notion doc. And it just did. And it made this beautiful Notion doc of like stuff that I could then just go
That is
edit,
nice.
line up.
Henry, what is an agent that you wish exists that you're not using today?
I think I already mentioned domain, but yeah, maybe another agent is one that can help me triage a lot of my emails. So I do get a lot of emails that.
Okay, Ani, what is the most overhyped area in AI right now?
I think there's like, without naming names, I think there's just a lot of things that get a lot of hype on Twitter. And I say this as an MCP company that like, I think become really saturated really quickly and there's really not much true value add there, which is why I'm actually focused on like not just MCP as a hype thing, but like what do AI native services actually bring to the world? What does it mean to actually make this like a real thing that's sustainable? Like the stuff we're doing on Auth is very non-trivial. So yeah, like I guess without pissing off like Twitter, I also just like there's only a limit to how smart models can get as well. So what's the next frontier after that when like text generation is pretty much solved?
Yeah, moving to post-training.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. Henry, what is the biggest blocker for real adoption of agents?
Well, obviously,
Like
an
MCP marketplace.
obviously, yeah, our opinion's biased, but I think it's context and capabilities. Like, there's a lot of like intelligence today. It's kind of stuck in a box.
Yeah.
So giving them access to context and capabilities will be the first thing to do to unlock immediate value. But I think in the long term, what that also unlocks is future training data. Because if you think about like foundation models, they've been sort of juiced up on all the internet's data. And a lot of that data is like kind of human generated passive data. You can think of it like the output of someone's blog post, right? But I think the more interesting type of data are the ones where it's like, what's the chain of thought that goes into writing that blog post, right? What's the chain of thought that led to that output? And a lot of that information doesn't exist online. You can only get that information when you apply the context you learned into actions and capabilities, kind of like R, basically.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you both.
Thank you.
This was really
you.
fun.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having us.